In an effort to show she takes rural issues seriously, Kathleen Wynne is not only the Premier of Ontario, but also its Agriculture and Food Minister as well. Last month, she held a news conference at a farm in Bradford, Ontario, which gave our producer, Mark Brosens, who hails from Bradford, an idea. Mark took to our website to ask rural Ontarians to describe their rural Ontario, and describe they did. Tonight, we're taking their comments and issues raised and bringing them to our guests. So, joining us now in the nation's capital, Mark Wales. He's president of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. Joining us just outside Owen Sound, Ontario via Skype, Jim Merriam. He's a freelance writer for Sun Media. And with us here in studio, Anita Stewart, food laureate at the University of Guelph, and Rob Hannam, who is chair of the Rural Ontario Institute. And we welcome you two here in our Toronto studio and our friends in Points Beyond.
Good afternoon.
I just want to set this up if we can, because last week we asked people on our website, Mark Brosens did, we asked people to think rural Ontario, to send us pictures of rural Ontario to our Pinterest site. Pinterest is one of these, social networking things. We'll show you some of those pictures now. We'll show some more at the end of the program. And the response, look at how gorgeous some of that stuff is. The response was really tremendous. So we decided to devote a program to rural Ontario and what you think it is. And just to make sure, obviously we're going to do that right now, let's understand what we're talking about. So, Mark, when you think rural Ontario, what do you think?
Well, thanks, Steve. I think rural Ontario is a very complex mix of farms, forests, tourism, recreation. It's, of course, different view in the winter and the summer. But it's a place where the people that I represent, the farmers of Ontario, do their best to grow the best food in the world. But we also enjoy the environment as well.
Jim, when I say rural Ontario to you, what comes to mind?
Well, very much the same, although I also would like to add the cultural aspect. Rural Ontario is as much a culture, I believe, as it is a place. And although the place is critical, and critical particularly to this discussion, the culture is broader than the place, I believe. People
forget the word agriculture is made up of culture as well, right? This isn't just about food, it's beyond that.
Absolutely, it's beyond that in a big way. And I looked at some of those photos that you spoke about on your site, and those idyllic type photos, those are the things that we get to see in rural Ontario on a daily basis, on our drives to and from work, etc., instead of glass and steel. And that's part of what we're talking about, I think.
Gotcha. Anita Stewart, rural Ontario to you means what?
It means the place that feeds the rest of the province. And a marvelous place to explore as well. And again, like Jim, absolutely, it has to do with tourism and culture. I go downtown, I live in Elora, so I'm sort of on the outskirts of what you might call rural and urban, sort of halfway between. But I go downtown.
Ex-urban, eh? Is that what you call it?
Yeah, I guess somewhat, quasi-urban, whatever. But, people say hello, and they say, how are you? And they mean it. It's
that doesn't happen in a city.
It tends not to. I mean, there are communities within cities, of course, but it's pretty neat, actually, and it's happened all my life there. And the other thing that rural Ontario is a place where you can work and you can broadcast to the world. I mean, that's what I do. I'm centered in the middle of Wellington County, and yet I'm creating a national food event that spans the country coast to coast. I did my online degree in gastronomy from the University of Adelaide in South Australia. I wrote about Quebec there, and that's because that's where I live.
You say it's a place where you can work, and shortly, I'm going to push back a bit on that because we have some numbers that suggest that's increasingly less so. But stay tuned.
You go ahead.
Rob, rural to you means what?
Well, rural Ontario is a beautiful place. I feel lucky that I've lived there much of my life. So I live and work in and around the Guelph area. It's where I grew up. So as Mark said, it's food and agriculture is a big part of the economy, but it's more than that. It's forestry and mining, but lots of beautiful small towns. But part of the thing we're here to talk about today is some of the challenges that are facing rural Ontario, and you alluded to that already with employment and the economy, and so we'll discuss that.
We sure will.
And that came out on your website that showed the photos. There's lots of those idyllic photos, and I'm lucky that I get to see those every morning as well. But there are challenges, just like in most parts of society. and we need some help.
We shall discuss. Not everybody agree. I guess I should preface this next question by saying what you have all described, rural Ontario and the state of mind it puts you in, is one thing. But not everybody agrees on what the geographic boundaries are of what you have just described. So if we can, control room, let's put this map up, because the ministry, Ontario's Ministry of Agriculture and Food and the Ministry of Rural Affairs say this is what rural Ontario is. And it's everything that's in gray right here. So obviously not the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, not London, not Windsor, go east, Kingston, Ottawa, of course. But there's a lot else there that constitutes rural Ontario. And Rob, I guess looking at that map, do you think that's correct, the way they've summed it up here?
Well, I think it's basically correct.
What would you take issue with?
Well, for me, rural Ontario is really rural and small town Ontario. So any city that's sort of, for me, less than 100,000 people is rural. And if you're away from a center that's got less than 100,000 people, that's kind of the dividing line for me. So I live just on the edge of Guelph towards a village called Rockwood. Beautiful little place. We're commutable to Guelph or to Milton and other areas. Lots of folks that live in that area work in Mississauga or in Toronto for that matter. But as you just go a few kilometers north towards Fergus, that's definitely into rural Ontario. You have less access to services, but again, a beautiful countryside as well.
Can I get that map up one more time? Because there is something that is certainly not on that map at all that I think we need to look at, and we need to come to some agreement as to whether this is or is not rural Ontario. You see the map stops right about on the north tip of Georgian Bay. And Mark, is that to suggest that nothing in northern Ontario constitutes rural Ontario?
Well, I'd have to disagree with the map. And the other thing I wanted to point out on the map, it shows large areas. It shows, for example, the city of Ottawa and the city of London. Much of the land within the boundaries of those two cities, for example, is actually farmland and is in itself very rural. But you ask a good question, what about the north? There's lots of agriculture going on in the north, lots of mining, lots of tourism, lots of forestry. That's part of rural Ontario as well, although much of the north is crown land, and that's typically why it's not thought of as rural Ontario. Farmers in Ontario own 80% of the privately held land, which of course makes us stewards of the land as well. And the remaining 20% is held by residential and tourism operators and so on and so forth. But good question. Typically, the north is not thought of as rural because much of it is crown land.
Jim, let me get you to follow up, because you're coming to us from near Owen Sound, which clearly is on the map of rural Ontario, but not much north of you is. Should it be?
No, I think it should be. I think it's certainly, we have so much more in common with the folks in northern Ontario. Like, for example, South Central Ontario and Northern Ontario have much more in common than either of us would with any urban area. So I think for sure Northern Ontario is rural. It's different, there's no question about that, but it's still rural.
How about that, Anita? Do you think that rural Ontario ought to include, obviously, Sault Ste. Marie's a city, Sudbury's a city, North Bay's a city, but there's a lot around those cities that seems pretty rural, isn't it?
Yes, I think so. I mean, it always strikes me, you say you have a camp on Manitoulin Island. That's within shouting distance of...
But that's on the map.
Yeah.
That's on this map.
So,
Manitoulin made the map.
Yeah, so I mean, I think my area certainly is extraordinarily rural, but I have to disagree with Rob when he says the services in Fergus aren't very good, because I tell you, they're fabulous.
You guys want to fight this out here?
Yeah,
or what's
I think
the story?
we're going to arm wrestle about it.
No, but I will add that my rural Ontario includes the north. It includes
Yes,
Northern
absolutely.
Ontario.
It does.
Oh,
For
of
sure.
course.
Not,
Of course.
not the cities, I presume. Like the Sioux is not rural, is it?
No, but I'm thinking of Lake of the Woods, Kenora.
That feels rural to you.
Definitely.
Even though it's owned by the Crown, or much of it is.
Much of the land.
Yeah, that's still rural for you. Okay. Let's follow up on this. Anita, you touched on this in your first answer. How central is agriculture to the whole rural Ontario identity?
It's extraordinarily central.
Extraordinary.
And I think one of the issues that we have, if there is one of sort of the most critical issues in Ontario, is the lack of communication between urban and rural. I mean, my feeling is that the urban-rural divide is far greater today all across Canada than any of the language or the linguistic divides have ever been.
Why do you think?
Well, I think part of we're not very good communicators, to tell you the truth.
Who's the we?
Collectively, Canadians. I think, in Toronto, there are the publications that exist. For us to get our culinary news, we have to go south of the border, generally speaking. I mean, there are good magazines, but they tend to be very regional. It seems to me that we've missed one thing. Farmers have to learn how to be communicators as well. They have to tell their own stories, because the really great farmers are doing that. Researchers and farmers create ingredients, not commodities. Mark may disagree with me on that, but I believe that they create ingredients so that cooks and chefs can create civilizations. Then communicators, such as this group, tell the stories, and again, the cycle begins to repeat itself around and around. We don't do that very well, and that's something that has to change.
Let me follow up with Rob on the first thing that you talked about, and Rob, with Mark. Mark, do you think that rural and urban Ontario are more estranged from each other now than ever?
Well, they are at times and on some issues, but people need to remember, and Anita, rural Ontario is a very complex mix of big farms growing commodities, small farms doing what I do on my own farm. I grow 20 different vegetables, and my customers all come to me. So I have a chance to really talk to the people who are going to eat what I grow and produce. So that's very important, and people enjoy coming out, and whether it's agritourism or whatever. I had a chance recently at the Rural Ontario Municipal Association conference to really debate the issue of just how important rural communities are to the province of Ontario, and they are very important. The cities and the country are very closely interconnected. The phrase "farmers feed cities" is as true today as it ever was. If there were no farmers and rural people, there would be no cities in the first place, and that's historical fact. Farmers provide a lot of the inputs for our food processing business, located mostly in the GTA area. We also provide the fresh water. We provide a lot of the clean air. We provide a lot of the entertainment for people. We also have a lot of people who are now moving back out to rural areas who have retired. Some are picking up a second career, a lot of them in focusing on the local food industry. So we're actually seeing, in some ways, we're seeing a changing demographics in the makeup of our rural communities, but we are seeing a bit of a revitalization as well.
Okay, Jim, let me follow up with this. We just heard Anita say that she thought the whole agriculture angle of rural Ontario was an extraordinary feature of its character. And I want to know if most of the jobs in rural Ontario have some kind of connection to agriculture these days.
Oh, I think they very much do. And I think that's part of our whole definition of rural Ontario that we've been talking about. A city such as Owen Sound, example, where I am calling from, is largely an agricultural service center. There are other industries that have nothing to do with rural Ontario, but I think that's another part of the definition of rural Ontario, is those cities and communities that exist to serve the rural area surrounding them. And that's very much a part of those smaller cities and the small towns throughout rural Ontario are all about its service to agriculture and to agricultural employees.
Rob, would you agree that agriculture is the biggest employer in rural Ontario still?
Well, I don't agree. I think agriculture and food is extremely important. I grew up on a farm, so definitely very important. I think direct agriculture jobs are somewhere in the 6 to 8% of the employment in rural Ontario.
Just 6 to 8% in rural?
But then there's a large, spin-off effect, right? So you've got extra jobs, whether it's transportation, the supplies that the farmers need, processing of the crops, or livestock. So it's bigger than that. But I think the largest sectors would be, manufacturing. I think in the rural areas, there's a higher percentage of manufacturing jobs than in urban centers. And we'll talk about that as well, but I think that's really hurt rural Ontario. The decline in manufacturing jobs the last 5 to 6 years has definitely hurt. But in terms of other categories, like
tourism's got to be huge.
Tourism is big, as is like health services and retail.
Okay.
If I could just interject a thought
Please.
about that. A lot of those folks who are driving trucks, or myself for many years worked in the newspaper industry and then went home and farmed. So there's a lot of crossing too of the two paths. A lot of people work off the farm. but still maintain a small acreage, 50, 100, 150 acres. And so they're employed in both, but their main employment would be off farm.
So their main employment, you say, would be off the farm. Is that right?
Off the farm, I believe, yes.
Okay. Here's where I'm going to take some issue with what Anita said a little while ago when we talk about the percentage change of employment in the province of Ontario. And you say it's still a place where there's lots of jobs and where people can make a living. And I'm just going to put these numbers out here, and I want you to speak to them first, and we'll all have a good go at this. Control room, can we bring these up, please? Here is, towards the latter end of the year 2012, you see the last 3 months up there, how the employment picture in Ontario has changed. In the large urban centres, there are the numbers, and you can see they're all in the plus category. Let's bring the rural and small town areas up, and you can see they're all in the minus category. And if you put it all together, we're barely moving at all there. That's just nudging on just on the plus side of things. And let's start by saying, Anita, those numbers suggest that if you're trying to make a living in rural Ontario these days, it's harder and harder.
Well, yeah, absolutely. No, that's absolutely true. I'm not saying that you don't have to multitask. I never have. That's what I do. I mean, that's just the way it is. I was looking at some of the bottom lagging regions in terms of employment in that same printout or that same report. And it's minus 8.1% in Stratford, Bruce Peninsula Economic Region in Ontario. And that's slightly lower than it is in La Naudière in Quebec and the north coast of BC, but then Muskoka and the Morrissey are right up there and over 10% down in terms of. Now, I know that over the last year we've been really worried about the decline in the equine industry. In my area, we have a slots and raceway and Grand River Raceway. They hold races, but they also have slots, and that's one of the things that when the OLG decided that they were going to deep six the slots in the various rural areas, all of a sudden the equine industry went down. And so I'm wondering if some of those jobs that were lost had something to do with that. I don't know the answer because
actually,
I didn't.
The Premier was in your neck of the woods just last week, making an announcement about saving.
That's correct.
Horse racing.
And that's why I'm so pleased that she's taken on the job of being the Minister of Agriculture as well, because clearly she has traveled the province and asked those same questions. She also has a fabulous Deputy Minister who has just been announced to it, who knows agriculture inside out and backwards. So I think there's great hope for Ontario in that regard. So that may be part of it. I really don't know.
Right,
but I think that there are other areas where, I mean, in our area actually, one of the really huge success stories, as far as I'm concerned, anyway, as somebody who likes to shop locally, has been very difficult over the years. I mean, there have been many great farms, like Mark's farm has been fantastic. I love his farm, but there haven't been all that many in my area, although they are growing good things. Is the Elmira produce auction? The old order Mennonites who gather together and sell their produce. Now this is the first year that they're doing it all year round to wholesalers or to restaurants or to small farmers to have farm gate at the end of your farm gate operation. So I can buy local ingredients a lot more all year long. That's one of the other areas
we appreciate hearing that. But Mark, I want to follow up with you again by just putting the numbers to you. If you look at the large urban centers of this province, employment is up over the latter part of 2012, and it is down quite significantly in all of rural and small town Ontario. Is rural Ontario still a place where you can make a living?
I would agree that it is, and certainly looking at those statistics, that really reflects what's gone on with the manufacturing industry taking a beating for the last few years. I live in Elgin County. We had a Ford plant at Talbotville that just closed a year ago. The city of St. Thomas right nearby me had a number of spin-off plants. So those mid-sized rural communities that Rob talked about of under 100,000, so 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000, those are the ones that really took the big hit during the recent recession, and they're the ones that will probably be slowest to come back. Industry will typically turn itself back on in the larger urban centers first, so that's partly those job stats. We're looking forward to the Local Food Act coming back to the legislature shortly, and with what Anita's talking about, that should really be a help to getting local food hubs developed and allowing for more production of local food in the rural areas, which will mean some more local jobs. But certainly for the small towns that depended on manufacturing, they've gone through a pretty tough period, and it will be slow to come back for them. But one of the challenges that we look forward to in agriculture as an industry, as I said at the beginning, it's very complex. Not only do we grow food, I've always said we grow food, we grow fuel, we grow fiber, we grow fun. So there's lots of new crops coming on that will be able to be manufactured. That type of manufacturing of a food-based crop for, say, coffee cup lids or something like that, for example, that would be a great opportunity for manufacturing to come back to rural small-town Ontario.
I want to go up to the Bruce Peninsula right now and find out from Jim whether or not those numbers reflect his understanding of the way things are in your part of the province.
Yes and no. We have a protection. We have a shield here called the Bruce Nuclear Power Development, which provides a lot of employment for a lot of people both on and off the farm and people who live in this area. And that protects us a little bit. It's a major operation. On the other side of the region, we have the tourism at Blue Mountain that also kind of protects us in a way there. So again, folks from the farm may farm in the evening and work at Bruce Nuclear in the daytime and that kind of thing. I'd also just like to go back a second to a point about Kathleen Wynne being agriculture minister. Those of us who live out in my part of the world think that's a bad thing. They think that we need much more attention on agriculture than she can provide because she has got such a huge job in digging Ontario out of the doldrums in which it has found itself, that she just can't possibly do the agriculture job too, and we don't think that's a good thing at all. So I'd just like to make that point as well.
No, I want to follow up with Rob on that because that's very interesting. Obviously, Premier Wynne took on the agriculture and food portfolio as well, Rob, as if to show rural Ontario, I am deadly serious about your issues and therefore I've made myself the minister. But I have heard, not just from Jim, but from others as well, that it has had a perverse effect in some respects because they think she won't have enough time to focus on our issues and therefore it was a bad idea. What do you say?
Well, I say any attention we can bring to agriculture and food is good. I guess I've seen it as a positive so far. We're talking about it more. It's in the media more. So far, so good.
Jim, you have to, well, I shouldn't say you have to. No, I shouldn't presume to tell you anything. But the fact of the matter is, with the Premier having the agriculture and food portfolio at the same time, there are a lot of Queen's Park reporters who have been covering agriculture for the past month because she's made those announcements that otherwise would not have been covering the issue. Would you grant that?
Absolutely. That's certainly true. But they're covering it from a perspective that without maybe the necessary background. For example, the good news about the racetrack announcement. Hey, it's a 3-year stopgap measure. It's not going to guarantee the continuation of the equine industry in Ontario, which has taken such a huge hit from this government and from the province. And it's really, on the surface, it sounds like a wonderful thing. When you really examine it, it means only 3 more years, and then we're going to lose those 30,000 jobs plus maybe as many as 60,000 when you count the spin-off jobs from harness racing.
Again, I'm going to push back a bit here because we had Dennis Mills from the, oh my goodness, what was the name of his organization? It's Racing Future. Dennis Mills from Racing Future and John Snoblin, who was on the 3-person panel looking at the future of horse racing. They were both here for an interview earlier in the week. You can go on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, and you can see the whole half-hour conversation where they both took questions from our viewers and online users. And they both say 2 things. Number one, a 3-year agreement with Kathleen Wynne is 3 more years than they got from Dalton McGuinty. And number 2, that they think this now provides the industry with a possibility of some kind of sustainable and even bigger future. They both suggested that was possible. You're not buying that, Jim?
I'm not buying that. The industry needed to look at itself and needed some changes, but I don't think that it will happen in 3 years. And I don't think the idea that the money that went to horse racing from the slots was a handout of some kind was ridiculous. The racetracks provided all the infrastructure, all the staffing, everything required to run those slots, and they were partners. And now the government of Ontario is going to partner with an American company, and instead of sharing the profits with rural Ontario, they're going to be shared with MGM in Las Vegas or wherever. And I don't see it. I just don't see that either way that it's going to help at all.
Okay, let me come back to Mark Wales and get his take on the issue of the Premier of Ontario being the Ag Minister as well. What do you think of that?
Well, I think personally, agriculture has never had this much profile in Ontario. Typically, and people need to understand the political process. From my perspective, if agriculture has a problem that it needs solved, the process normally would be you'd have to convince the minister and his or her bureaucracy first that there was a problem. Second off, you'd have to convince them of the solution. Then the minister would have to take that to cabinet, convince their colleagues on the right solution. We've skipped all those steps now. If I have a problem and I have a solution that I can offer to the minister and therefore the premier, I can take it right to her and her staff. So when the premier, as Ag Minister, brings something to cabinet, that tells the rest of cabinet this is the right answer. From talking to ministry staff as well, they've never been so popular with all the other ministries. And one of the things that we've been trying to push is to get all the various ministries that affect agriculture and rural Ontario just to talk to each other so that we don't get legislation that doesn't take into account the needs of farmers in rural Ontarians.
Okay, but Mark, you
So
may
quite
have skipped
frankly,
all those steps. Hang on, you may have skipped all those steps that you just referred to, but the criticism is she won't have enough time for you because she's obviously the Premier as well. And furthermore, she may be from Richmond Hill once upon a time, which was a more rural place when she lived there, but she's represented, Midtown Toronto for 10 years and therefore really isn't up on these issues at all. Fair ball?
Fair ball, and she is a quick learner. And quite frankly, it's good to have some fresh eyes on the portfolio. But at the end of the day, I'm more than happy to say, here's the problem. I've worked with our stakeholders and our commodities and our farmers. We've come up with the best consensus-based solution to the problem. All you need to do is take it through cabinet and make it the rule. So I see this as a quicker way to get things fixed that we need fixed. I will grant Jim there was a problem with what was done to the horse racing industry, and of course it was not a subsidy. That was really a mistake ever calling it that. The agreements that they're working on, the 3-year agreements, I see those as a positive step towards a longer-term permanent solution for the industry. So great first step. Now we need to see more.
Anita Stewart.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing, as I mentioned before, is that Kathleen Wynne, as a minister, has a fantastic deputy minister. And it's really, at the end of the day, it's the deputies that actually do the work.
Okay.
She's from rural Ontario. She lives there. She,
The deputy, you're saying?
Yes, forever.
Okay. Let's talk about improving the rural Ontario economy. And I want to get some ideas on the table here. We saw the employment figures a moment ago. They're not encouraging. Let's go through some ideas. Rob, throw an idea my way and tell me what's one thing that governments could do, private sector could do, third sector could do to get those employment numbers up and the economy doing better in rural Ontario.
Well, I think we need a rural strategy.
Do we not have one?
I don't think we have one that sort of cuts across all the different sectors, not just, Mark's group is working on a food strategy, and that's fantastic. But I'd like to see a rural strategy that cuts across the different areas, because it's not just agriculture and food. It's more than that. It's mining, it's forestry, it's retail, it's the services we talked about. We need to protect the manufacturing jobs that we have left. Maybe protect's not the right word. We need to support.
That's a loaded word these days.
Yeah, we need to support the manufacturers that are still in place and have weathered the storm, shall we say, and whatever we can do to support them and keep them thriving.
Okay, Mark, you want to put some ideas on the table, please?
Actually, Rob's idea about a rural strategy would be great, tied in with a food strategy, because they are both interconnected. We need a lot of work on rural infrastructure, so roads, bridges, hydro infrastructure, natural gas infrastructure. With gas prices where they are, a lot of farmers would like to use natural gas as their energy source. We still have some issues around rural broadband. High speed is not always high speed everywhere, and that level of technology, a lot of farmers and small town businesses need to go forward. So that would be a good idea.
Okay, there's some more ideas. Jim Merriam, you want to put some ideas on the table, please?
A lot of what we're saying is absolutely correct. And this call I'm making from my son's home, because the high speed at my little farm isn't nearly as high speed as it is here, 20 miles away. Decentralization is another issue, I think, that could be looked at again. Look at what decentralization did for the city of Guelph in the agriculture departments, and some of the government money that is spent on on administration and bureaucracy, et cetera, is in a smaller community. And I think there's more can be done with that.
Where's the headquarters of the Ministry of Rural Affairs? Anybody
Toronto.
know? It
Toronto.
can't be in Toronto.
It's at One Stone Road in Guelph.
In Guelph.
Yes.
Is that the headquarters in Guelph? I think the headquarters is in Toronto. There's an office in Guelph, but I think the headquarters is in Toronto.
I stand corrected then.
I'm not sure, but I think so.
Okay. Anita, what's on your
What
rural
we'll
strategy?
do is we'll
sorry.
suggest that it should be Guelph.
Okay.
We'll make sure
No
that it is
question.
Guelph going forward. There's offices in both places.
Mark, I can tell you're going to leave the studio in Ottawa and immediately get Kathleen Wynne on the phone and say it's time to move the headquarters from wherever it is, maybe Yonge and Wellesley in midtown Toronto, downtown Toronto, out to Guelph. Anita, what's on your list?
We have to fix the transportation issues in and out of Toronto. That's one of the biggest things. I mean, it's ridiculous. How can people even visit our area? That's part of it for sure. I'd like to see more emphasis put on culinary tourism as well.
What's that mean?
Traveling with a healthy appetite, no matter where you go. I mean, going to Manitoulin and having a Farquhar's ice cream, that sort of thing. Coming to my area and going to the farmers markets. I mean, one of the great success stories is the growth of farmers markets all across the province, and ones where they make it, bake it, or grow it. People who are actually doing those things coming into the cities. You've got an array of them here in the city of Toronto, but even in Elora, we have a great little farmers market. And the 2 or 3 in Kitchener-Waterloo, 1 in Guelph, and so forth. And those are tourist destinations as well. And again, becoming better at telling our own stories, being proud. Pride's not a 4-letter word.
Would there be enough employment in all of what you just described?
Would there be enough employment for what?
Yeah. I mean, if you manage to get that sector of the economy firing on all cylinders, is there enough job creation in any of that?
I don't know. I'm not an employment specialist, but I think we're a pretty creative people, and I know farmers are particularly creative, so probably.
Mark Brosens, incidentally, just whispered in my ear that the mailing address for the Ministry of Rural Affairs is, in fact, in Guelph, Ontario, and not at Yonge and Wellesley, where so much of the rest of the public service is. So do we infer from that, Mark, that that's where head office is, in Guelph? I guess we do.
Yes, we do.
I guess we do.
I stand corrected. Sorry.
Okay. Let me follow up on this. I want to spend a good chunk of time here talking about, for lack of a better expression, what city folk don't get. And there will be people watching this program right now who live in big cities, who spend an hour and a half, 2 times a day, commuting to their job, who will say to themselves, we are sympathetic to the problems of rural Ontario, but we have problems in urban Ontario too. And if the growth is in urban, and the future jobs are in urban, and the activity is in urban, then that's where we've got to put the investment. And if rural can't keep up, sorry, but we may just have to cut our losses and let it go. Rob, what would your response to that be?
Wow. So the first thing that comes to mind is I think about like the internet and access, and someone in the conversation mentioned broadband. So having high-speed access for everyone. That's a luxury that everybody in the city, I think, takes for granted. There's free Wi-Fi hotspots up and down Yonge Street where we are today. That's not the case in every rural municipality. Some towns, Tillsonburg, for example, has fiber connections, I understand, and some of them have done a great job with it, but it's spotty. And when you think of access to education, new information, our kids growing up, if you don't have access to internet and high speed, so you can download videos, look at educational programs, look at how many kids are doing games and learning activities online after school. If you don't have proper access, that really puts your whole, that whole area behind. These are basic necessities. Someone mentioned bridges and infrastructure. So when I think of a road here in an urban area, we want to make sure it's resurfaced and repaved and fixed by tomorrow's rush hour. We've got 20 bridges in our local municipality that have deferred maintenance, and they may need to be closed. And when they're closed, they're not reopening. Our municipalities does not have the funds to maintain them properly and to replace them when they're necessary. So people who live on that road may have a huge detour just to get to any kind of town. These are significant impacts.
Jim, let me follow up, putting it in just a little bit of a different way. If people see that the economic progress in inverted commas, being made in this province are in the big cities. The jobs are disappearing from rural Ontario. The demographics in rural Ontario are certainly much older than the demographics in the rest of the province. What's to stop somebody who lives in a city or in a suburb from concluding the investment of the future ought to go in the cities and not in rural Ontario?
Well, they do so at their peril because they have to eat the food we produce in rural Ontario. They need the power that we're now producing with apparently going to produce with all these wind turbines, which are ruining the landscape in rural Ontario and a lot of health of a lot of people. They need, where are they going to go on the weekend when they climb down out of their apartment in downtown Toronto, if not up through rural Ontario? And there have to be roads for them to do that, and there have to be amenities here when they get there. So I don't think it's anywhere near that simple, that it's all happening in the cities, so let's forget about rural Ontario. I think they need us every bit as much as we need them.
Mark, how would you answer it?
Well, I think that's a great response. One of the challenges is the pace of change in rural Ontario is less visible, say, than it is in downtown. But certainly we need good infrastructure, partly so we can get our inputs in as farmers and get what we produce out again. We also need those good roads and bridges and so on, so that people can come out to rural Ontario, whether it's to come to a farm to pick some produce or to enjoy some tourism, whether it's to go to a play in a rural area, whether it's to go to their cottage or a beach or whatever. We're all very, very interconnected. If they want all of the development to simply go in the urban area, then perhaps we just shut the tap off to the water and the food and the gas and the power. And the moment the store shelves are empty, what are they going to do? We're all connected. We all have to get along. We have to find a way to make sure that there's development in both areas, so that this province can do its best going forward.
Anita, you live in a city, right?
Well,
You work in a city. You work at the University of Guelph.
well, no, I work from my home.
You work from your home,
Yes.
but you're affiliated with the University
Yes,
of Guelph.
Yes.
I was going to ask you, what's a food laureate anyway? That's your title.
Oh, I'm writing my job description right now. I'm trying to connect within the university, and Guelph is Canada's food university, and I would suggest that Guelph is pretty close to being the center of food action central for the entire nation. I'm trying to connect the silos that exist within the university, because one department doesn't know what the other department is doing, and so on. It's quite amazing.
So let me pick up on that word connect. Do you think that people in cities understand the connection that we've had two other guests already describe with rural Ontario in their everyday lives?
Yeah, I think some do. You know, as you may or may not know, I work with chefs a lot across the country. I've got 250 or so. Well, that's the history of Canadian food. The project I'm working on now is connecting chefs from coast to coast to coast for one food day across the country, and we're doing it. This is our 10th anniversary. The people, from my perspective, who are the brand advocates, are the chefs, are the leading chefs of the nation. They're the ones that are going to put on their menus. They're going to tell their patrons what's going on, and they are going to shop from people like Mark. They're going to shop from people like Rowe Farms and so forth. Cumbray Farms, the cheese makers, Upper Canada Cheese, Ruth Classen and Montforte. These are the people who are actually going to be doing the education. And so what my job, again, as Food Laureate is doing, is I'm bringing some of the chefs and writers to the university to see exactly what's going on. 2 weeks ago, we did a potato tasting. I actually had 4 chefs from across Canada there. We did a potato tasting of 12 different kinds of potatoes. 2 of them were actually known. The rest were numbered varieties. We have a potato day at the
All
university.
grown in Ontario?
All grown in Ontario and trialed at the university, and they're being developed at the university and so forth. We also went to the Biodiversity Institute, which is the hub of the International Barcode of Life project. Paul Hébert, who developed this technology, is there, and we're doing DNA sampling. And their focus, one of the commercializations that they could do is food fraud. So I mean, there's a tremendous amount, and nobody sort of within the university has gone over and seen his 45-minute presentation. So those are the things that I want to do.
Okay, let me pick up with Jim Merriam on this aspect. We hear a lot of talk in political circles these days about values, and I want to get your take on whether you think urban Ontarians and rural Ontarians actually share the same values.
No, I don't think they do. For the most part, I don't think they do. There are individual circumstances, obviously, that might differ, but the values out here still involve the idyllic things that we've talked about in our photos. They involve family, and church is still huge in many parts of rural Ontario, no matter what you read, and the environment and all those kinds of things. And Friday night at the bar is not part of it, and going to the theater is not part of it in the same way that it is at the city. And I'm not saying those are bad things, but the priorities are totally different, I believe, and therefore the values are different as well.
Rob, how about political values? Do urban and rural Ontarians share the same political values?
Yes, I'd say so. But I'd say there's a perception in rural Ontario that when policy is made, I think they perceive that they don't have input. There's probably three things. The general perception that policy development in Ontario favors urban versus rural. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that's a perception. The second thing, just that there's less decision making at a local or regional level. And Ontario is so diverse. Like, I've lived in rural Ontario, known people from across the province, and I couldn't pretend to know everything about these different areas. I think the people who live in these different regions and areas, they know their strengths. They know how to get their economies going again. We should be empowering them, supporting them, as opposed to a more of a centralized decision-making method that's gone on in some issues.
Mark, I'm going to really, pile on the stereotyping here, and I want you to tell me how we get beyond this. There are people in rural Ontario who obviously believe people who live in cities are a bunch of, snobby, urban, pseudo-sophisticate arses, for lack of a better expression. And there are people in urban Ontario who think people who live in rural are a bunch of hayseed, undereducated, et cetera, et cetera. How do we bridge that gap?
Well, that's kind of a tough one. Just going back for a moment, you asked about are the values different between rural and urban, and some of them are. You're more likely to help your neighbor or someone who's stranded if you're out in a rural area than you are in an urban area. A lot of people in urban areas simply don't understand what farmers do. They don't understand that what we do is often totally dependent on the weather. So how do we get them to link? How do we get them to understand each other better?
Right.
That's the challenge.
Okay, that's the challenge. But I know we're having a discussion about it here in the hopes of encouraging some mutual understanding. But Anita, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do actually.
Go ahead.
I think the Farm Start organization is one that's really needs to be better understood. They've got an incubator farm. McVean Farm is an incubator farm, and they're trying to help some of the people who are new immigrants start farms. Now, I'm not sure what size of farms. Probably not really enormously large ones. In terms of values too. I guess going to a pub in Elora makes us rural or urban on a Friday night, because that's what we do. It's a wonderful area in which to raise a family and to nurture a food culture that is unlike any other on earth. Part of my own research over the years is sort of comparisons between sort of the essence of what a region is. And Ontario is almost 4 times the size of Italy. And we understand Italy as having many regional differences and many little aspects. of Northern Italian food is different, the Sicilian food, and so on and so forth. We're over 4 times the size of France. And again, hyper-regional country, that we think is fabulously sexy, wonderful food. We shouldn't beat ourselves up too much on it. We're still very new, and we're just learning.
I do want to go at Jim, though, on this. On the 2 stereotypes that I brought up before, the sort of hayseeds versus snobby city slickers. Do you think there's any way of bridging those 2 divides?
Well, communication is the only answer, and I as a communicator all my life, I'm not sure I know how we get there. We haven't ever been able to get there so far. How we get there now, I don't know. I don't have any ideas on how to improve that. I'm not sure more organizations or new organizations are the answer. I think it has to be through the media, probably partly through new media. But from that point on, I don't have the answers.
Certainly visiting helps. Anytime anybody from a city visits rural Ontario, you can't help but fall in love. I would say that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's finish up. We got a few minutes left here, and we've talked about a lot of the challenges that rural Ontario has, and if it's not the case, I don't want to leave people watching this broadcast with the sense that all is hopeless out there. So, Rob, tell me, are you, in spite of all the numbers and in spite of all the challenges that we've talked about, what's your level of optimism about rural Ontario's future?
Oh, I'm very optimistic.
Why?
Because we have a lot to offer. Not only just the natural resources we talked about, as we think about the Great Lakes that surround us, the rich countryside, the resources, all of that's important and can help solve some of the real social issues or the environmental issues that we're facing globally. I think we're in a beautiful spot in Southern Ontario and Northern Ontario, just fantastic. We've got a hardworking group of people in that area. They're resilient. And they want to win. They want to survive and enjoy the lifestyle that we've got and help move the province forward. So,
Jim, where are you on the optimism-pessimism scale?
I'm pretty optimistic as well for many of the same reasons. I think the key that we have to do is find a way to get more input into decision making that affects us. In other words, we have to have a better connection with the provincial government so that we have our say on things like the wind turbines that are tearing rural Ontario apart totally needlessly. And if we can solve that issue, I think we can move forward, and I think we'll have a good future.
Mark Wales, what do you say?
I'm quite optimistic as well. Agriculture, which I'll tend to focus on, obviously. If you look forward here, Canada is going to be one of only 6 countries in the world shortly that will be a net exporter of food. So our opportunities from an agricultural perspective going forward are enormous. We do have to have, though, some societal discussions about things like the preservation of farmland. And those are issues we're going to need to deal with. Should we be digging it up to extract limestone and gravel and so on to sell somewhere? Or should we be preserving it so that we'll be able to grow food in the future and have agritourism and have small manufacturing in small towns? We have enormous opportunities here going forward. And again, our strength, as someone mentioned, is that we are very resilient in rural Ontario. We can adapt, we can change, we can evolve. But at the end of the day, we want to keep making this one great province to live, work, and play in.
I got 20 seconds, Anita. Can you take it?
Absolutely, food and water first. Absolutely, food and water first. We have to. It has to trump aggregate. I mean, that's it. And
well,
yes,
the mega quarry's not happening. You guys won that one.
Well, they still own the land, so
They'll be back.
They'll be back, eh?
They'll be back. So I
Okay.
agree. No, I'm very optimistic. Are you kidding? I think it's the best country in the world to live in.
Well, I love Mark's 4 Fs: food, fiber, fuel, and fun. Those are 4
The
good
fun.
reasons to go to rural Ontario. And if you do,
Absolutely.
you'll love what you see. I want to thank everybody for joining us around our literal and metaphorical table here on TVO tonight to talk about all of these issues in rural Ontario. Mark Wales from the Ontario Federation of Agriculture in the nation's capital. Jim Merriam, somewhere outside Owen Sound via Skype. Thanks for joining us, Jim, up there.
Thank
Anita
you.
Stewart, the University of Guelph, and Rob Hannam from the Rural Ontario Institute. Good discussion, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.